Hello, everyone, and welcome to NAIC Insights. This is, in fact, the final NAIC Insights as you know it, and I have the absolute honor today of interviewing an industry icon, Miriam Rivera, CEO and co-founder and managing director of Ulu Ventures. Miriam, bienvenida.
Gracias, Carmen. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I thank you for making me the last of these. I hope that's a good thing, and that we'll be able to have a really fun conversation today.
Well, that's guaranteed. That's guaranteed. From all of the prep and the other conversations, I know that it's going to be a treat for the audience. You know, one of the before we start, I just want to take a moment of executive privilege and say that as a Latina who is in this financial services space, it is such an incredible honor to have this opportunity to talk to you, to watch your career, to learn so much more about you. You are truly an icon. I don't say that lightly, and you inspire so many of us. So thank you for all that you do and all that you are.
Thank you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be a pioneer, if you will, in the Latina community in particular. And I know that I'm really fortunate now to have sisters in VC across many firms, over a dozen firms with women-led partnerships. And it's been an exciting time. And it's hard to imagine how early it still is in the history of Latinas in venture capital and Latinas in finance. And it's been a real privilege and a ton of hard work too. So don't want
to. Well, we're going to get into that now. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the things, as you know, we talked about in our prep sessions is that Insights is really part human interest, part sort of hard-hitting interview, right? And so we always like to start really getting to know who you are. Right. So I'm going to ask you to take me back all the way back. Take me back to kind of, 6-year-old Miriam Rivera with her little moñitos, right? Navigating this, brave new world. Talk to us about what your early years were like.
Well, my family's from Puerto Rico, and we lived in Chicago when I was growing up. At the age of 6, I was at Agassiz School on the north side. And I lived in a predominantly Puerto Rican community at that time that has since gentrified and is no longer predominantly Puerto Rican. But pretty much everybody upstairs, downstairs, and on the block was from villages like where my parents were from. And so it felt like a family, like you could not get in trouble because everyone would tell your parents what you were doing. And that's kind of how I grew up. I was really fortunate to go to Head Start in Chicago, and then to have some advantage from that because I was Spanish speaking first. And so that was really kind of when I learned English and continued that in kindergarten. So a little bit like many people, I think, who are in venture, bilingual and bicultural.
Mm-hmm. Outstanding. So when you think about those days and in your earlier years, we'll go beyond 6-year-old Miriam. Were there, icons, role models, people that you look up to in the industry? Was there, Doña Tere that everyone thought was who they wanted to be when they grow up? What were some of your inspirations when you were growing up?
Well, I would say that some of my inspirations are, not the kind of neighborhood lemonade stand and not that experience that I think a lot of people consider as their inspiration. My parents were migrant farm workers when they started. They were factory workers. And so for them, I think the goal was that we would get a good education and not be able to work in the fields and maybe be able to run things as opposed to be on the factory floor. Mm-hmm. The idea for me in terms of investment then was very different, which was about investing in education and investing in myself in that way. And so I remember in 7th grade, I was had some outreach from a Better Chance program out of New York City which helps to put kids into boarding schools at that time. And so teachers recommended that I go and participate in a session that they were having downtown to encourage kids like myself that were high achieving, but in need of scholarship assistance for college to actually go to this boarding school in Exeter, New Hampshire. So I did that. And when I was 13, I basically started working over the summer to save enough money so I could buy my own supplies and my own clothing to go to school away from home. And I started high school in a town of 10,000 in Exeter, New Hampshire, where at the time we were the first generation of girls that were being admitted for coeducation. So the school had been over 100 years a boys' school and was now coeducating. And we were the first generation of kids to be coming in through a Better Chance program. And so I was maybe the second Puerto Rican student at the school. And this was in the time of Saturday Night Fever. So I went in my little three-piece black polyester suit, very John Travolta and professional. And I landed in a place where everybody else was dressed in LL Bean, and I was totally out of fashion there. And I had never seen some of the kinds of clothes that they wore, like were very popular at that time, and boat shoes and things that didn't know. And I really consider that the beginning of developing an investment mentality. And many people I know, like Hannah Young, for example, who used to be at FRB and is now at Allocate, she asked me one time, did I think she should go to the Kauffman Fellows program? And I said, I think you should always invest in yourself. If you think this is going to be an investment that's going to pay off for your career, for your family, for the life that you want to have, go for it, you know? And so that's kind of how I started in terms of investing, was pursuing education.
Yeah. I love that. I wonder, you started down this path, and I want to go down it a bit more. Going from a neighborhood that was of your culture, right? That you were one of the many, right? To a place where you were one of two in the history so far, and to a community that was probably diametrically opposed to what you were used to. Culturally, comida, música, right? Completely different. And even community, right? What were some of the challenges that you think impacted how you show up as an investor today?
Well, it's interesting. Like Exeter was so white that even the janitors were white, and like that is really like there was not a white there was not anybody that was a non-white teacher, administrator, staff member, janitor, right? So like this was a place like unlike anything I had ever seen growing up in Chicago. And in the interim between that neighborhood and Exeter, I had gone to a middle school that had a gifted program and was both ethnically and economically diverse. So we were close enough to Lakeshore Drive to have kids that lived on Lakeshore Drive come to our neighborhood school, especially because it had a gifted program. And we had a complete population of students that were representative of a lot of the kinds of folks you see in Chicago. So we had over 60 different languages that were spoken at home. And the kind of kids that would come to my birthday party included Japanese, Indian, Black, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Appalachian, many different cultures. And so I was, and it was frankly there that I think I found my own personal identity was being part of this very diverse community of kids, because as a Puerto Rican girl, I was a bit of a tomboy. I was the kind of girl that didn't like the gender norms that often were existing in my family. You know, like the girls had to do all these chores, had to stay indoors. The boys got to do more things. And so I was a little bit of a rebellious girl. And then in middle school, I kind of found my spot, you know, with teachers that were really encouraging girls to get an education through this gifted program that had identified this Exeter program that I participated in and encouraged me to apply and supported me in that work, because many of them had been unable to actually pursue other kinds of jobs. And I remember I had this really well-intentioned, beautiful teacher who did help me get into this program. But when I talked about some of the things that I would be able to do if I went to college, she really tried to maybe help by saying, I don't want you to be disappointed. You know, like this other boy, Jorge, who's going to go to a like Deerfield Academy, maybe he'll be able to achieve those things because he's a boy. But, you know, I don't know what you're going to be able to do. But regardless, it's going to be great that you have a college education. Like, you know, she was a teacher. Her mother had been a teacher because women had been locked out of almost all the professional roles except teaching and nursing in her generation. And so I'm really happy to say that, you know, one of the things that people said I should do was go to law school. And I was ultimately able to go to law school, and I was able to become a professional. I was able to make my own wealth. And that was even an aspiration they thought might have been too much at that time. So these were some of the people that were like my role models, I call them like angels in my path.
Mm-hmm.
They changed the whole direction of my life. But even they were afraid for a girl like myself to want too much.
Yeah. You know, it's amazing because I think about, you know, these environments where our parents, they place us with the best of intentions, right? And they're like, this is the best opportunity that my child can have to have the greatest education, and to expand what he or she has access to. And I often underestimate the marginalization of it, right? How we kind of sit on the peripheries. But what I think it does for us, and it sounds like it absolutely did for you, was it helps us develop some superpowers, right? It helps us to see things differently. It helps us to develop a compassion and an insight, right, that powers us later in life. So let's talk about, if people were a little worried for you, how did you find your way into Stanford, right? You've got a JD MBA from Stanford. I mean, wepa, right? Absolutely. Talk to us about how you found your way there.
So at Exeter, one of the really tremendous things was the education I received there was obviously top notch. And one of the ways in which I gained confidence was the fact that while I was there, I was a high honor student. And I realized that I was able to compete at kind of this national level of excellence that I think Exeter has historically enjoyed for probably a couple hundred years now. And so to me, that was one of the most important things that I gained, was self-confidence, even though, like, I agree with you, it was kind of a marginalized experience. But one of the things that was kind of fun was we had this group called the Afro-Exonian Society, and that society was basically where all the minority kids and anybody who was kind of minority friendly would probably participate in the community. And so it was a very diverse community of those students. And I think we gave each other a lot of moral support. And, you know, like one of my best friends, one of my bridesmaids is still one of those high school girls. She went to Harvard Law School after that and practices law in LA. And so we see each other fairly regularly, even to this day. So, you know, one is developing friendships is its own kind of armor support, so that you can be in league with people who share ambitions and values. And I was grateful to find those everywhere that I've worked, everywhere that I studied. I always try to tell people, you will find your people. You will find the friends that are going to, like, you know, we've now been friends since we were 14 and 15 respectively. And I'm not going to say how long that is, but it is.
No one's counting. No one's counting.
But from there, I just really knew that anything was possible. Like if I could do that well there, I would get into college. I would be able to do almost anything. And so that was worth the marginalization, was just the realization of being able to compete in that environment and to achieve and to work hard and to realize that those were some of the fundamental things that it took to succeed. And then I applied to different schools. I got into all the schools that I applied to, and I had been able to visit most of the schools on a $200 Amtrak 7-day ticket with my, a whole sleeve of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and apples and oranges and, a very small amount of cash, and stay on people's floors and as kind of a visitor in the dorms. And so I had seen the East Coast schools, and I never got a chance to come to California because just couldn't fit it into a 7-day trip. But the way of Stanford and the West and the possibility to be part of what felt like a much more emerging community. Like when I went to Exeter, I was asked, are your people on the social register? And where do your people summer? And I didn't know, who were they talking about? Were they talking about Puerto Ricans? Were they talking about Chicagoans? Were they talking about, families? The words just weren't even the same. And then I never saw summer as a verb before. And I didn't know what the social register even was. And, for your generation that's probably listening, it's like Facebook, but it was the real books in the old days. Like and people that were socialites, and they would be part of this register of people that would be kind of given the White House seal of approval, if you will, or the good housekeeping seal of approval that they were from good families. And so a lot of these people interacted together and spent summers in places like Martha's Vineyard and, Rhode Island and that kind of thing. And so that's how I learned that summer is a verb. If you have a family that can afford to actually take a summer off. Right. Which wasn't my experience of my family. And then, but California felt like it was a more open culture where people did not ask you if you were on the social register. And so I felt really attracted to it. And I think that the fact that the computer industry was moving from the East Coast to the West Coast had a lot of unintended consequences on my career. I came out here, and my first career was actually in the not-for-profit sector. I worked in higher education. I worked encouraging other students to go to college, to go to graduate school, to get internship and work experience as a counselor, both at Stanford and then at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Also worked at Foothill De Anza Community College with reentry women and equal opportunity program students. So my first career was very much focused on trying to help create opportunities for other people through education. And then I decided I would go back to law school and business school and end up working in the tech sector here in Silicon Valley because I really wanted to stay in the Valley. And those kinds of jobs were really the, kind of the gateway, I thought, of being able to make it in Silicon Valley was to work in the tech sector.
Yeah. And so you worked for, at the time, a little company called Google. Tell us about that experience.
When I joined Google, it was a little company. Literally, I was a 60-something employee of the company, and we were all in one building. And the engineers made the rack servers with our servers in the hallways. As we walked up, they used like real baker's racks, like what people use as opposed to the official kind of hardware racks that are, I'm sure, used now. But this was very startup-y. So they literally made the servers without the tops because it was cheaper. And also they developed the system of being able to change like motherboards and circuit boards out on roller skates in the data centers where our rack servers were used. So these Google guys would roller skate around and they'd replace all these boards, and it was much easier if you didn't have to unscrew the tops. So it was really startup-y. And we sat on yoga bowls and had really bad furniture and bad phones. We had doors for desks. So it was really glamorous days of startup life. I really loved it. I I literally shared a wall with Larry and Sergey in my first office, which was one of many offices because we grew so fast that I think I was in like 5 different buildings within a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm. That sounds amazing. So you were employee 60 something at Google. What was the transition from there to now to then investing?
Okay, so one of the things that had been clear to me in Silicon Valley, because I worked on some IPOs in the mid to late 90s. I worked with attorneys that did M&A. One of the attorneys that I worked for was a gentleman named Ed Leonard, who was the first counsel to Cisco Systems, and Cisco Systems actually introduced him to Sequoia Capital and Doug Leone. And he later went on to investment banking and venture capital himself in his career. But the experience of seeing somebody who had been in the law and then moving into venture was something that I always knew was possible, and that I'd seen others make the path. And not all of them even had an MBA as well as a law degree. Mm-hmm. So when I went to Google, and I was the first commercial counsel there, and ultimately became the deputy general counsel for the company, which is kind of the second chair, if you will, in the law. There was a general counsel named David Drummond, who was an African American. He was the son of a Tuskegee Airman. I had been hired before he was, but he had been our outside counsel at Wilson Sonsini, one of the illustrious firms in the Valley. And then there had been a patent attorney who was hired before me, and we were kind of the 3 senior people in legal at Google. And he was Black, I was Latina and Black, in terms of my color. I'm Afro-Latina. And then the patent attorney was Indian. His family had immigrated from India. So we were a very diverse team, and we had the opportunity to really grow this business from, my first year. It was still a pretty big company, even with 68 employees. We closed an $85 million revenue year in 2001 when I joined the company. The company had started in November of 98. So it was one of the fastest growing companies in US history. And between that time and when I left in the year 2000, at the end of year 2006, it was a $10 billion revenue company. So literally one of the most successful of the 200,000 plus companies that receive venture capital investment in the last 25 years or so.
Mm-hmm. So what inspired you? Because you're in the mix, right? You're in Google, you're kind of squarely in the mix of Silicon Valley, technology, scaling, really, really exciting times. And while your department and division and team were diverse, Silicon Valley likely remained not so diverse. What was the opportunity or the inspiration, the drive for you to say, you know what, I'm leaving and I'm going to start Ulu Ventures?
Those were a little bit separated in time. I remember leaving and feeling like, I need to sleep. That's what my first priority was like just actually getting caught up on years of sleep, especially because I also had a 2-year-old when I started at Google, and I had a second child a couple of years before I left. So sleep was high on the priority list. And as I thought about what my opportunity set was, I saw the potential, obviously, to be a Fortune 500 general counsel. Our general counsel stayed at Google for the next 15 plus years. He was only a year older than I, so that was a limited upward trajectory for myself. I could have moved laterally into a VP role in another aspect of the business, but decided I would potentially look at Fortune 500 general counsel roles initially. and also roles in potentially in tech here in the Bay Area. There's kind of a role that is a rinse and repeat. Like if you've been at one of these kind of companies, you could go into the next kind of company like that and potentially do that same role and like kind of scale up the function and take it public. And then, you know, when that company is more grown and settled, if you wanted to rinse and repeat, you could start over again at some other next company that was going to go public. And so had the right set of experiences potentially for both of those, but realized that I'd kind of done one of the most interesting legal jobs that I could imagine. Like I grew my own team from the three of us to over about 160 worldwide. I had grown the function of a Fortune 500, what became a Fortune 500 company from 68 people, and was now operating in, you know, over 100 companies around the world. I had handpicked every person that worked for me. And so inheriting a different legal department or growing what would most likely be a much smaller legal department at any other company, because very few companies, even to this day, I read a study by Bain that said something like maybe 15 companies that out of that 200,000 set of venture-backed companies had achieved $10 billion of revenue. And that was in the early days of Google. Obviously, now it's 100 billions, you know, it's a whole different animal. But so that was something that felt like kind of been there, done that. And I'm a little bit of a rebel girl. Like I want to keep learning. I want to keep growing. I think that's one of the things that has really made it possible for me to have my career, is that I'm not afraid to start over, and I'm not afraid to start at the bottom, and I'm not afraid to go up a different ladder. So I've gone up the ladder in not-for-profit, higher ed. I've gone up a ladder in the law, and I've gone up a ladder, if you will, in venture capital by starting at the bottom. Building your own firm is the bottom, where you kind of do everything and then you grow it to something.
Yeah, I love it. And so just for the audience, let's remind everyone, what is your strategy?
Okay, so Ulu Ventures is a seed stage firm based in Palo Alto, California. We're internet and software focused. We do some hardware, but mostly when it's related to things like data and analytics. And our focus has always been on both increasing access to capital for diverse teams that were typically overlooked by venture capital in the US. And that is still true largely to this day, unfortunately. And the focus has always been on being able to identify companies that could become public companies. And so our first two public companies that we invested in were Palantir and SoFi. We were the lead seed investor in SoFi, which is a public company. And both of those companies had diverse teams at inception. And I don't know that many people would think of Palantir as being diverse, but you know, one of the founders, the CEO, is half Black, half Jewish. One of the founders was gay and an immigrant. They definitely met at Stanford Law School. They were on opposite sides of the political spectrum, and yet they have built a very successful company together. In terms of SoFi, that team had a hidden diversity in that the wife of the CEO was actually the first chief technology builder. She has since worked with him on two other companies that each have achieved $1 billion of valuation or higher. She is an Asian woman named June Ao. And, you know, really the technical whiz, if you will, at each of those companies, including SoFi and Figure. And now I'm forgetting the name of a company. I'm sorry. Their third company together, but it is Provenance. Sorry.
So talk to me. So first of all, I love that a Latina, and especialmente Puertorriqueña, was one of the first investors, right? The lead investor in SoFi and Palantir, and Guild Education is another one of your unicorns that has done.
And Zoom is another one. ZUM, not ZOOM, is another women-led unicorn. Both Guild and Zoom are women-led unicorns in our portfolio.
Love it. Love it. And so you are now in AUM at over 400 million?
Yes, we have 400 million in assets under management.
And you had a successful fundraise of your last fund of 208 million. But talk to us about, it's been a really challenging few years, right, for venture. It's just, people have been moving to more conservative strategies. They've definitely not been investing in new relationships quite as frequently as they were maybe several years before. Talk to us a little bit about what some of your magic was. Performance, clearly, right? But what was some of the magic, do you think, that are skill that allowed you to be successful in such challenging environment?
Yeah, one thing we really try to distinguish is this notion of magic from skill. Those are really important words because in venture capital, there's this mythology of the Midas touch, for example, that certain people have the Midas touch and others don't, that they can see the future and others cannot. And I really have to say, like, I'm sure there are people that might have some natural gifts, but the way that we tend to work at Ulu Ventures is a very data-driven approach, which is to help quantify the value that we expect to see in each company by doing a process we call market mapping, which helps to look at the total addressable market in a very bottoms-up approach to understand the fundamentals of a business, its business model, what its unit economics are going to be, what its exit potential will be based on historical exits in a given space, what dilution is likely to be given the experience that we've had investing in over a couple of hundred companies over this time and understanding data from the industry, what the chance of a success is. And, when I'm talking about a chance of Google, you really are talking about the top 1% of the 1%. So we hope to invest in those kinds of companies, but we know that there were only 15 out of 225,000 of them, according to Bain Consulting. So we're really clear that the majority of investments that any venture capital will make, and that includes the best and the brightest, like Sequoia will have a 5% success rate. Sequoia is one of the largest investors in Silicon Valley. Andreessen Horowitz, for example, I think they compete also by the size of their portfolios. They make hundreds of investments in any given year. And that helps them to both numerically increase the odds of their financial success and the diversification of their portfolio. I think a lot of people don't appreciate that you can be both selective and large. And that is an advantage in venture where the rate of success, according to Cambridge Associates, like over 14 years, 2.5% of the companies that were studied in the industry had achieved the highest rates of return. So everybody depends on portfolio construction and some amount of luck to identify the top performers in Silicon Valley.
We talked a little bit when we were in our earlier conversation about balancing data with sort of insight and instinct. How do you do that? Because you're still investing early, right? So you're investing as much in people as you are in the strategies. How do you balance the two?
Well, I will say that I tend to be a bit more intuitive in terms of like what I like or what I want to see. And my investment thesis can be quite broad. And a lot of the times, one of the things that I learned over time is that I have a really good head for money. And it wasn't because my family had any, but maybe because they didn't have any.
Yeah.
And so, one, I learned to live within my means. I learned to save, and then I learned to invest. And each of those was a different step in my trajectory. I didn't really even know how to read the stock tables until I went to business school. It was in business school. Like I remember one of my professors saying, "Oh, a lot of you are going to go into investing, but like I hope most of you put your 401ks into index fund because that really works." And, and I remember thinking, putting my money into an index fund to begin with, So I have an index fund that I put some of my first 401k. I had $20,000. It's grown to over $300,000 just because I never touched that money again. But I touched other money and put it at tremendous risk in terms of startup companies and in ventures. So for us, the approach that we use called decision analysis, it was a kind of analytic approach that was developed at Stanford University and Harvard University. But the practitioner that we followed was a gentleman named Ron Howard. And he basically helped to develop this method of quantifying and looking at different situations in a way where you could diagram it, create business models to analyze problems and make predictions using the best of cognitive research. So a lot of cognitive research is telling us how we make really bad decisions and do really dumb things. And Kahneman and Tversky are some of the well-known Nobel Prize winners in these spaces that always identified, like, what do people do wrong? What Ron Howard tried to figure out is what can we do right to overcome these human biases that we are carrying into decision making. And he basically developed a prescriptive approach to making better decisions. And Clint Korver, who is my partner at Ulu, one of the co-founders of the firm, our chief investment officer, and my husband both. He is someone who got his PhD with Ron Howard. I studied with Ron Howard. Our VP of analytics studied with Ron Howard. And so we have brought that to bear on venture capital decision-making and bias reduction. And that is one of the ways in which where biases might enter, we work very hard to minimize their impact, both in the ways that we break down decisions, and then as we think about people, which is actually one of the things that we believe leads to the great disparity of access to capital that exists in venture. It helps us to be accountable for our assessments of people and teams. We have benchmarked now hundreds of teams, and we use a methodology of doing some pairwise comparison against these benchmarks that are proprietary to Ulu that helps us to make better decisions about teams.
So going back to my earlier question, you stick to your knitting. You've got prescribed methodologies. You have experience-based outcomes, and you've stuck to your knitting, which has led to success. And that was likely the biggest reason why you were able to successfully raise a fund in the face of so many headwinds over the last couple of years. Fair?
Well, fair. One other advantage is intergenerational wealth. Because of that Ulu exit, I had my own wealth. And I have invested a lot of that wealth in Ulu. The great majority of it is now investments in the ground in companies that are exited and or exiting as well. And one of the things that we were able to do because of that, people were not willing to invest in a husband-wife team. Regardless of those anti-discrimination statements that many organizations have about how they are fair in employment and contracting, people would just tell us to our face, nobody will ever invest in a husband-wife team, even though marital status discrimination is illegal. And so we basically ran Ulu, the first fund, as a family office fund, developed a track record through that. And then as that track record developed, then we were able to go raise a fund. It took us about 8 years to get to that point where we raised the first fund. Many people are able to do that with a lot less experience than I have. Especially young men. Like literally one of the people that I asked for a referral to one of our current LPs who wouldn't give it to me was a venture capitalist who said, "Oh, venture capital is a young man's game, Miriam." So he just wouldn't give me a referral. Again, that organization has been invested in ULU through other referrals since that time.
Mm-hmm.
When I first started, that's the kind of stuff I was still getting. It was as if people just didn't even realize that they were engaging in illegal discrimination, and very blatantly so.
Didn't know or didn't care. Right? Didn't know or didn't care. So, which makes your success all the more impressive, right? Talk a bit about, you mentioned earlier that 2 of your unicorns are women-led companies.
Of our 10 unicorns, 5 of them had a woman who was actively involved at the beginning.
So why them? What was it about those women in particular that were the right CEOs, the right leaders for those companies in the time? Give us examples of success by these women and traits.
Well, Guild Education you mentioned, for example. So that woman was getting her MBA at Stanford, but had already worked in higher education, had worked in venture-backed higher education, and really identified some of the causal failures for the programs to be able to grow and educate people. Community colleges are the first line of access for education for the majority of low-income people in America. And included in that are many of the diverse communities in America. And unfortunately, they serve many different masters, if you will. And so people who often go to community college hoping to be able to transfer to 4-year college end up unable to do so. And mostly it's because of poor math education in the United States is actually what is leading to the lesser access to higher education for more people, including low income and minorities. But it's also the case that, so this team was on fire with trying to figure out how do we actually create access to higher education in ways that really works for working class Americans. And so they ended up doing that by creating a benefit for companies to be able to pay for college for their workers. And, I went through, I worked for a credit union called Masterpreneurs Credit Union that helped pay for night school for its, so these kind of tuition reimbursement programs have existed for a very long time, but the general availability of them was mostly for companies that were like office and desk work compared to like fast food and service jobs, which is really where a huge part of the American population and low income population is working today. And so they created programs that would allow like the employees at Chipotle, the kind of employees at Starbucks had its own program, but that was one of the models they used to create this education tuition reimbursement program. And then they helped partner with a huge number of different college programs that would allow students to, go part-time, weekends, evenings, online, et cetera. And they've really helped to create access for higher education for working class Americans at companies like Walmart and Chipotle and a number of other organizations. But it was really started by a young woman whose passion was around education. It had been historically the passion in her family as well. Mm-hmm. Her father was one of the founders of Western Governors University, which was another program that tried to create access to education online and physically for people in the Western states. So she had a lot of depth of domain experience because of that. So factors that, passion, that's one of the things that I look for, because when the chips are down, those people will continue to work really hard to really make things work. Networks that actually advantage the business. You would be fooling yourself if you don't think that's important. You would definitely want to have that. You want to have skills and training. This was an MBA, Master's in Education candidate. Another similar woman co-founder with her. And then, some of this lived experience in terms of professional work that she had done on her own and through her family's knowledge of higher education, altogether were those kinds of characteristics of success, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that almost everybody that I invest in has a combination of that passion, lived work experience that makes them so attuned to understanding the concerns of their customers that they can develop better solutions to solve those problems than other people can.
Yeah. Let me ask you the absolute opposite question. What you look at probably hundreds of deals a year, right? Hundreds of opportunities come through your funnel every year. What are some of the things that, like, the moment you see them, it's a non-starter. You absolutely will not look at their showstoppers for you?
I think one of the things that we get a lot of is just people barking up the wrong trees. Like, oftentimes it will be a kind of business that we don't fund at all. Like, there may be a great restaurant out there, and there may be venture capital firms that invest in restaurants and restaurant technologies, but we're probably low on the list of people that you should be contacting. Mm-hmm. So I think there's an approach where founders do a lot of mass mailings to different kinds of investors that are completely the wrong investors for the kind of business that they're trying to fund. I would say that most of those are also businesses that are not tech businesses. We're typically investing in technologies, right? And so we may get a lot of other businesses that are looking for investors. And I think it's just people wanting to use a blanket approach. What I would say is that, like almost anything, the more targeted your approach, the higher your chances of success and the odds of getting the thing that you want are. So trying to actually identify investors that are investing in what you do would be the first and most important work that you can do as an entrepreneur. Also, the same with customers, and the same process basically holds. Like, my sense is you kind of work through your known network to access people that are the right people for the thing that you want. Mm-hmm. And you are always working backwards from where you want to go and like the interim steps that you're going to have to take to get there.
Yeah. It sounds, that's so familiar in terms of even for founders of firms, right? Of investment firms. I get this question all the time. And so I'm going to ask the expert, right? What is the universe, or what is a universe of LPs that, whether they're family offices, whether they're small municipal pensions, whether they're insurance companies, what are some of the most fruitful universes in LPs for venture today that you're seeing? Where are some of the most active pockets?
Well, I think that it depends on where you are in your firm's trajectory, obviously. Mm-hmm. I would say that the majority of firms that don't have an established track record are going to high net worth individuals, corporates that are strategically aligned with the kinds of investment that they may be doing, and that it takes a while before many of them can access more institutional kinds of LPs, like foundation endowments, higher education endowments, pensions, insurance companies, and the like. Although some of these programs and banks, obviously another big category, Some of them have had emerging manager programs, and NAIC was a great way for us to meet a lot of folks from these emerging manager programs through your programs that help connect people and doing some of the mini pitch sessions that you do and conferences, like GCM's Emerging Manager Conference. A lot of the pensions in your local area may have an emerging manager day. Some of those are online things that you can watch to research. But this is a mega research project, is what I have to say. My sense is that as a first-time fund, it will be hard to raise a fund because it's your first-time fund. And, then we had a pandemic fund, and then we had a bank failure fund, is how I think about my ULU 3 funds. So each time has been its own challenge. And I know that there are a lot of people who say, don't waste time on meeting LPs who are above your pay grade. Like they'll say, why talk to a pension when you're a $50 million target fund? But I would say, go through that process, not with the sense that you will get an investment, but you will learn when you will be right to get an investment. And so some of the people that, came into Fund 3 for us, I had met 10 years before. And I had been cultivating those relationships. I know there's people say, I don't have time to cultivate relationships, but sorry, there's a lot of people, there's kind of a qualification process. Will somebody invest in a first close of a first-time fund? Will they invest in a first-time fund? Will they invest in an emerging manager, 3 funds or under? Have they ever invested in a minority-led fund or woman-led fund? You'd be surprised at the answers to real qualification questions. So I'm not saying don't qualify the people you speak to from organizations, but keep your database so that when you're at the right point to reach out to a different kind of asset manager, allocator, and you will have actually met them when you weren't raising. Just like many VCs, you'd rather meet somebody when they're not closing around in 5 days. You'd rather meet them.
That's not a good approach. We are coming to the end of our time together. I want to ask you, we can't not talk about the current environment, right? And the impact that it's having, certainly, on our the firms in our space, on founders that are from underrepresented communities, in the face of that, right? Because you are a can-do, will, over, under, around, through approach. In the face of the real challenges and the fear and uncertainty and chaos that we're experiencing here and across the globe, what are some of the things that excite you?
That's good. I like that question because I've been hearing a lot about
what's terrible about it. I don't want to sit in that place. Let's talk about what's good, what's possible, the art of the possible.
Well, I'm actually excited about the fact that we're moving from AI infrastructure, which is completely unaffordable at kind of my fund size, into AI applications that I think could really transform specific verticals, and some verticals in which I've been an investor in the past, including AI for legal. I have a number of investments, including some that have been acquired by LexisNexis, for example, that I think were amazing technologies. And for various reasons, they would make more money for LexisNexis than they could make as a standalone company. But I do believe that the AI space in legal is not finished yet. I know there are some big players in that space already, but I'm looking at that very closely as a former practitioner. I know that I will know when the technology would really have served the kinds of need that I had doing many different areas of law, working at a Fortune 500 and sitting in like a lot of different seats. As Google grew, I probably practiced a little bit of every area of law until I could hire somebody who could do it better and faster than I could. So that's some area that I'm pretty excited about. I continue to be excited about new areas of distribution of software, like the big channels for software distribution have moved to the cloud through places like Amazon W Service, AWS, Google, Oracle, other kinds of places where software is bought and sold now. I think that's an interesting space to look at. So on the enterprise side, there's, I think, a great deal of innovation coming at the application layer where I typically invest. And then in terms of on the education side, I've always been a big investor in ed tech. And I'm seeing some really interesting applications there of AI, including a company that I recently invested in that is helping create individualized education plans, assessments, and compliance for special education, which impacts a huge number of American children. And, poor teachers are just overloaded, and this software really helps to save them a huge amount of time, and at the same time do it all in accordance with the Common Core standards, and just really help kids to learn. So seeing really fun, exciting application layer software that I think will make a tremendous difference in people's lives, and that I think also makes the affordability of software available to more industries that may have been laggards in adoption.
Yeah. So if you had a room full of young people, a young class of diverse associates who are sitting, watching the news, hearing all of the things that we just brushed over, but are impacting people's lives in real ways. What would be your advice to that class of associates as they hope to one day be in your shoes?
I think that we all have to figure out this combination of where are the skills that I have, the passions that I have, and the need of the world. Like, where do those things intersect? And where can I be the most impactful with my career and time? Because really, our time is the most limited resource that we have on Earth. You can find other people's money and leverage your time with that money. But I think in terms of where do you want to spend your time, where do you want to give, where do you want to contribute in the world? But also realize, like, do you have all the skills? Do you have all of the ability to withstand the hardships that it will take? One thing I had as an experience when I was that 6-year-old Miriam, I grew up in a family that had a lot of domestic violence. And I remember praying in the closet, feeling like I'm not sure I can make it. And feeling really, really, I'm a spiritual person. I felt the hand of Christ to touch me and to let me know that whatever happened to my body, the rest of me was going to be held and a survivor and indestructible, really, because that part is of God and with God. Mm-hmm. And so I think in part because I had this personal experience of God in my life, I have felt like I've been largely indestructible most of my career, and I've been able to withstand the hardships in the environment that I've experienced. And I would say that venture has been harder than any field I ever worked in, and that the challenges have been oddly more painful because it's a really odd field to work in, the intersection of tech, finance, and venture, in that there really is a universe of people who don't believe that we're all of God somehow, that we are not all equal in God's eyes. And to me, that is just an astounding thing, given my own experience of my faith. And I've been challenged myself to always retain that faith, because this is a field unlike any other. You know, we only have 1.4% of the U.S. wealth being invested in firms that are led by women and people of color. This is an area where we have kept it segregated, and it has not fundamentally changed very much since the days of Jim Crow ending. And I think that is astounding to many people, but it's just the truth. And I had never really seen this level of that in any other environment where I've worked.
So polish your armor, stay prayed up.
And remember, your friends are part of your armor, and people like you, you know, this positive, joyful person that you are, and the remembrance of joy and the things from our culture about, you know, service, and frankly, the expectation in Latino culture that those to whom much is given, much is expected. Those values are really important to make it through some of the hardships that you will experience if you decide to pursue this.
And the good times are worth it.
Yes, and
I mean, they're worth it.
There are so many ways in which you actually really do change the world. Like these companies that we've invested in, they change the lives of kids. Like Zoom is transporting special needs kids in schools, and they're actually learning more because they spend less time on buses and more times in classrooms. You know, Guild is helping working class people to get bachelor's degrees that does actually increase their standard of living without taking on debt. Like, you know, Palantir is protecting, hopefully, our information from some of our own government here. So let's count on the many ways in which, through our work, much good can come in the world.
You know what? We are going to close it on that wonderful note. Miriam, gracias por todo, por tu inspiración. Thank you so much for everything, for your inspiration. We are cheering you on. We are here to support any bit of your success that we can contribute to, as we are to all of our NAIC member firms. So I thank you. And with that, we will bring the NAIC Insight series to a close. Thank you all for joining us today.
Un placer, un honor.
Gracias.
Hasta luego.